Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the most fascinating character studies of all time. You know, when you think of a notorious television kingpin, your mind probably jumps to someone loud, unpredictable, or explosive. You think of a Tony Soprano or a Tugo Salamanca, guys who literally wear their violence and dominance right on their sleeves. But then, there's Gus Fring. Pretty much everyone who watches his story unfold comes away with the exact same first impression. They think, wow, this guy is the absolute calmest, most collected man in the room, like he's entirely made of ice, completely detached from the messy realities of his world. Well, today, we're going to look under the hood of this character's architecture, and we are going to completely shatter that assumption.
Because here is the truth. He's not calm at all. He is angry. Actually, scratch that. He's probably one of the angriest characters ever written. And once you realize this, it totally flips how you view every single thing he does. The terrifying part about Gus isn't that he feels nothing. It's the exact opposite. He feels absolutely everything. He just doesn't show it. He hasn't gotten rid of his rage. He's just compressed it, locked it away, and completely weaponized it.
Okay, let's get right into part one, the illusion of calm. Let's talk about this incredible facade he puts up.
When people talk about Gus, they almost always throw around three specific words: disciplined, patient, and strategic. And hey, on a surface level, absolutely true. The man runs a flawlessly optimized corporate machine. He literally presses his own shirts with mathematical precision. He drives around in this super sensible, low-profile Volvo, and he uses this incredibly gentle customer service voice with everyone. He doesn't rush his moves. He thinks 10 steps ahead. But listen, while all those visible traits are true, focusing on them completely misses the point. Those are just the symptoms. The root cause is much, much darker. People look at his intense discipline, and they mistake it for peace.
And that brings us to a really crucial distinction: weaponized rage. This is what it actually means to feel everything intensely, but keep it locked inside a psychological vault. Think about it. How do most people react when things suddenly go wrong? They panic, right? They yell, their heart rate spikes, they make dumb, rash decisions. Gus doesn't do any of that. He slows down. He just observes. He waits. From the outside, that utter lack of panic looks like pure genius and extreme calculation. But if you look closer, it's not just intelligence. It's trauma that he has refined into absolute precision. It's a guy who learned the hard way that showing even a sliver of emotion is a fatal liability.
Which brings us to part two, weaponizing the wound. Let's look at the origin story of how this machine was actually built.
Let's dive into the exact moment this happened. Step 1. His partner Max is brutally murdered by Hector Salamanca on Don Eladio's orders, right in front of him. He's pinned down, forced to look into the eyes of the person he cares about most, completely, utterly helpless. Now, for almost anybody else, an event like that just creates paralyzing grief. But for Gus, moving to step 2, he bypasses normal grief entirely. The trauma essentially rewrote his internal operating system. It wasn't just about survival anymore. The ultimate vow, as we see in step 3, was birthed right then and there. I will never be powerless again. That single, horrifying moment spawned a lifelong, relentless obsession with total control.
So, what's really fascinating here is that Gus doesn't build his massive empire for the money. The fast food chain, the flawless logistics network, the perfect public image as this pillar of the community, none of it is about wealth or typical ambition. He builds the entire thing strictly for emotional control. Every single restaurant he opens, every polite little smile he gives a customer while wiping down a counter, every perfectly measured sentence he speaks to an adversary, it all serves one incredibly specific purpose: to keep the chaos out and to keep the revenge alive. His empire is essentially a moat. It's this massive psychological fortress designed solely to protect that one unhealed wound from ever being exposed again.
All right, let's pivot to part 3, the trap of total control. This is where we uncover his fatal flaw.
Because here's the thing, a fortress can turn into a prison incredibly fast. There is a massive difference between genuine peace and a rigid psychological trap. Real calm gives you freedom. Real calm says, I can let go. It's like lying in a hammock, right? You just know you're safe. But Gus doesn't have calm. He has control. And control says, I can never afford to let go. It takes constant, exhausting energy. It is literally like holding a door shut against a Category 5 hurricane. You let go for 1 second, and the storm destroys everything. Gus's version of control is just a state of active, exhausting, trauma-induced suppression.
And this is exactly why Walter White was such a monumental threat to him. Walt wasn't just some pesky business rival. Walt was a walking mirror that threatened the entire illusion that Gus had everything under control. Walt brings unpredictability, massive ego, and just human messiness, the exact chaotic stuff Gus spent decades systematically removing from his life. Walt doesn't play by the highly structured rules of Gus's fortress. He's the hurricane actively trying to blow that door off its hinges, which forces Gus to burn more and more energy just to maintain his grip.
Which leads us to the ultimate fatal flaw in this whole system. When your entire identity is built around control, when your absolute best defense mechanism against your deepest trauma is making sure everything goes exactly to plan, then anything you can't control starts to feel deeply personal. When Walt acts erratically, Gus can't just brush it off as a business problem. It feels like an existential threat to his own psyche. And honestly, this is how really smart people end up losing. Not because their IQ drops, but because they get emotionally cornered by the exact same system that made them so powerful to begin with. His greatest psychological defense literally became his undoing.
And that is exactly how Hector Salamanca pulls off his brutal checkmate. Hector doesn't outsmart Gus. Come on, Gus won pretty much every strategic battle he ever fought. But Hector wins by ringing that bell. He triggers the one specific thing Gus spent his entire life trying to bury: his hatred, his rage, his deep need to personally watch his abuser suffer. Hector totally bypasses the intellect and forces Gus into one final, deadly emotional reaction. By stepping out of the shadows to deliver that killing blow himself, Gus finally lost the only battle that ever actually mattered, the one inside his own head.
Okay, let's take a beat and move to part 4, the real-world leak, because this isn't just about a fictional cartel boss. It actually applies to us.
We really need to talk about how this applies to the real world. We as a society tend to idolize leaders who never break, never react, and never lose their cool, right? We look at them and think, wow, that's what true power looks like. But the reality is often way darker. You can look perfectly composed, you can be sitting at the head of a massive boardroom and still be completely ruled by one unresolved wound. You'll meet people who look insanely disciplined. They're up at 4 a.m. managing huge portfolios, never even breaking a sweat. But often what you're really looking at is just pain, organized so flawlessly that it masquerades as mastery.
Let's walk through how this actually plays out with real-world leaders and high achievers. Step 1. They take their deepest unresolved issue, maybe it's a fear of poverty, a desperate need for validation, some unhealed trauma, and they funnel it into this super rigid structure. Step 2. They use that intense focus to build massive things: empires, companies, incredible reputations. And you know what? It works wonderfully, for a while. But here's the massive warning sign at step 3. If that core wound is never actually resolved, a collapse is basically guaranteed. The pain always leaks out eventually. In the real world, this is the visionary CEO who suddenly torpedoes their career with a massive public outburst, or the high achiever who hits a totally devastating wall of burnout. The emotion they suppressed ends up destroying the very structures it built.
Gus Fring wasn't a powerhouse because he lacked emotion. He was a powerhouse because he figured out how to turn his emotion into structure. But the real tragedy of his character is that he never actually got free from it. He lived in a prison of his own making, right up until the literal explosive end. And honestly, that's why he remains so unforgettable. Not because he was calm, but because he made rage look elegant.
Which brings us to the final thought for today's explainer. I'd love for you to take a look at your own life, your own strict habits, your own pursuit of control, and ask yourself this. Are your greatest disciplines actually giving you freedom? Or are they just a really elaborate way of keeping your chaos locked inside? Take a moment to reflect on that. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you on the next explainer.